welcome back to the podcast. Today's guest is Alex Larson. Alex is a sports nutritionist and dietitian whose speciality is figuring out how to get athletes lean without compromising performance. And that's exactly what I want to talk about today. How can you shed those unwanted kilograms, but also give yourself the fuel needed to keep making those training adaptations? Welcome to the podcast, Alex Larson. Alex, welcome to the Roadman podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Anthony.
Alex, I want to try and figure out how to get lean, as in I or a hypothetical person has some weight to currently lose. No point in hiding behind the hypothetical person. I got some physiological testing data done with John Wakefield from Bora Red Bull. Testing data, we'll cover that another day. It was so-so. Threshold was actually decent. What I was shocked with was my body weight and my body fat percentage. So my body fat percentage was in the 20s. I think it's like 22%. And it was 84 kilograms. Bearing in mind, I was racing at 68 kilograms. Now, it's been a couple of years since I stepped on a scale. I've been having a few too many curries, occasional late night beers. And so now going back training for next year under the management of John, I need to figure out how to take off weight while also performing. So that's kind of my overarching goal for this conversation. So when it comes to getting lean, what's the first areas that a cyclist should focus on?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, keep in mind that when it comes to body composition with endurance athletes, it's a very highly individualized process. So, I mean, anything that I'm going to say here is not going to be like a blanket advice for like every single person that's going to work. But from what we typically see with athletes that we work with, we will usually start with making sure that they're getting enough protein. We want to make sure that when we do put them at a little bit of a calorie deficit, that we still are getting enough protein to maintain that strength. Because a lot of people, when they restrict and try and diet to lose weight, they will often see their strength and performance decline during that process. And then they get kind of frustrated and they're in this kind of yo-yoing and roller coaster of trying to lose weight and perform well. And so making sure first and foremost that we're seeing adequate protein throughout the day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. We're trying to get in enough protein to maintain, if not help build some muscle during this process too. Because sometimes when people have taken, an extended period of time off from racing, maybe they've seen some weight gain, but they also might have lost some strength as well. So anywhere from 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilo is usually the range that we look at. But we'll also kind of see like what are they currently eating for protein? Where do they need to be? And do we have a really big gap? Okay, then let's start kind of slowly working their way up. Because if they're going to all of a sudden overnight increase their protein greatly, that might be a little overwhelming for them. And we kind of need to work with them and what's doable first, and then kind of build up to what's optimal. Then the other thing that we might look at is timing of nutrition. A lot of athletes tend to not eat enough during the day. And what we find is that they end up kind of binging or not making the greatest choices later on in the day in the evening hours when they're more tired. Yeah, Netflix, they're just kind of feeling the munchies and they're kind of grazing throughout the evening. And so if we can really nail down a good routine during the day, I had a cyclist just yesterday who had a really significant like breakfast and lunch, and he messaged me in the evening. He's like, yeah, I'm not really that hungry this evening. I'm like, it's probably because you've already like pretty much hit your nutrition needs for the day and you're just satisfied and ready to go to bed and relax for the evening. So I think front loading the nutrition is another common one that we work with our athletes on, because earlier on in the day we tend to make a little bit better choices, and during the day is when we're most active, so we're able to actually use that energy that we're taking in to fuel our day as well.
So would you classify this as a body recomposition, or is it a cut, or does that classification even matter?
I tend to just use the term like body composition because I don't like the term weight loss. It kind of has a negative connotation to it. People associate that with like dieting or restricting. And I like to think of, especially for athletes, it's like, okay, when you say you want to lose weight, what you mean is you want to lose that body fat, you want to lower that body fat percentage, and you want to maintain, if not put on some muscle. And so we really are adjusting that body composition first and foremost before we actually focus necessarily on just weight loss itself.
So the second part you mentioned was protein intake, and I think you gave an upwards limit of 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. How does that sit into the overall macronutrient distribution for the day? Is that like 25%? Is it 50%? What does it look like?
It's usually around 25%, give or take a little bit in there. Typically is what we see, anywhere from like 25 up 30%. We can go that route, but we'd also have to make sure that they're getting enough carbs to support their volume of training. You know, if you're in more of an off season, we can lower the carbs a little bit, but if you're in that higher, you know, volume training, we want to make sure that we're getting adequate carbs as well, just to support performance. So there's a bit of a fine balance there, and we might work on timing of things. Like if you're on more of a recovery week, we can dial things back a little bit there versus, you know, in a really like peak training week where you're having some pretty heavy, long, hard training blocks. We'd want to make sure that we're not stressing out the body or putting yourself at risk for injury in that as well. So we can get a little strategic with timing.
That makes sense. And that protein range you mentioned from, I think it was like 1.4 to 2 grams. What determines if I'm sitting at the top end or the bottom end of that range? Should I be looking to hit higher to that range, closer to the top of the range? If I'm doing a gym session that day, if I'm doing a bike session that day, as opposed to a recovery day?
Yeah, I think it's nice to have a range so that you're not trying to shoot for like an exact number where you're like obsessing about your food. Sometimes I'll just kind of look at like what's 1.8 and kind of shoot for like that ballpark. But if you're at like 1.5 and you're trying to, you know, improve that body comp, you're trying to put on some muscle, I would try and see if you can increase it up to 1.8 to 2. But it's certainly like I said, it's kind of one of those things, like what's most doable for you to be consistent with it. Like if you really struggle to do 1.8 to 2 and it's just not consistent for you, then don't beat yourself up about that. Like don't like give yourself anxiety because you feel like a failure and you feel like you're not successful. Like 1.5 to 1.8 is still great. So that's where it depends on the athlete and what's doable for them in their schedule.
And do we have a changing protein need as we age? If you contrast an athlete in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s?
Yeah. What we've found in the research is that, you know, in our 20s, we tend to absorb protein really efficiently. Whereas when we get into more of those masters athlete category and, you know, above, we will see that we don't absorb that protein quite as well. So you might need to consume just a little bit more to account for that.
I've just slid into that masters category myself.
Did you? I didn't realize it was 35 and up. So when I looked at it, like, I don't know, it was about a month ago, and I go, oh shit, I'm in the masters category.
It's like brutal,
for the past 2 years. It was a gut check. Yeah.
Hurts the self-image. So given that I'm sliding into this masters category, like, is there anything that I can take to enhance my protein uptake, absorption wise?
I think there was a research study done on like plant-based protein, and we actually don't absorb all of the protein from like plant-based sources because of all of the fibrous like matrix of plants. Our body isn't able to fully break those down and get all of that protein. So if you are more of a plant-based eater, you might need to especially up that protein intake for sure to like 2 grams per kilogram, which is tough for like vegan vegetarians, but you might not be absorbing all that protein from there just because of the complex, like that matrix of the plant itself is hard for our body to break down and digest.
Roman, I'm going to date myself here, but I've been riding the bike for almost 20 years. And in that time, I've cycled through every cycling apparel brand out there. and I kept swapping out different apparel brands each season until I found Le Col. There's something really different about Le Col, and as soon as you slip into the gear, you notice it feels different, it feels better. I've had the pleasure of chatting with Yanto Barker on the podcast. He's the Le Col founder, and his dedication to crafting the fastest, most refined cycling apparel out there, it's nothing short of inspiring. Yanto isn't just trying to create gear. I get the feeling he's actively and obsessively trying to perfect cycling gear. Trust me, as soon as you slip on the Le Col kit, as soon as you zip up that jersey, you can feel that commitment. The proof for Le Col, it's in the pudding. This is the same kit that Jay Hindley wore when he clinched overall victory in the Giro d'Italia. There's a confidence that comes with wearing apparel that's been battle tested and podium proven in races like the Giro d'Italia. Trust me, feeling good on the bike means you're gonna perform better. If you have a second, I highly advise you to jump on over to lacol.cc and check out their amazing range of kit and experience this feeling for yourself. And I remember chatting to someone, I can't remember if it was off air or on air before, but if you look at humans, so you take someone that plays Halo on the couch all day, they eat Cheetos, they're human, but they're a bit of a sloth, right? They haven't got, their muscle composition is terrible, they're overweight, they struggle to walk down to the stairs to get the takeaway. You contrast them at one end of the spectrum to some of the top athletes, a Tadej Pogacar, Usain Bolt, whatever. Like, they're the same species, but are they the same species? They're like almost totally different. Is protein like that? If I have a factory farmed salmon who's just in there slothing around with another 10,000 salmon swimming on them, there's surely a difference that I'm wondering how we measure it between that and a wild-caught salmon who's fighting off predators and who's swimming against tides and currents and figuring out how to survive in Darwin's world that he set up where survival's quite tough and only the strongest survive. What's the difference between eating those two types of proteins on our body?
Honestly, I don't know if there's really that big of a difference in the protein itself. I mean, with the farm-raised fish, I know that they're given a little bit different diet, so they might be raised a little bit differently, but I don't think our body can identify, like, oh, this is a wild-caught salmon versus
But, like, have you ever eaten, like, wild elk or something? Like, you don't feel the same after it. Like, you feel like this is something that's been fighting for generations to stay alive. Like, it feels like I'm after eating it.
I don't know if I've ever felt that way. I don't know if I've had elk. I probably have had elk before, but like I've had venison before, like deer meat, and I don't know if I've ever felt that way.
I want to see the data on this. I want more. We're gonna get more studies on this.
Maybe that's the placebo effect of you just feeling like a man, like, oh, I ate some elk or a buffalo.
Yeah, possibly. Actually, that's an interesting segue to that around testosterone. Like, because testosterone is such a key performance indicator, especially for male cyclists. Is there particular foods we can eat which support the production of testosterone?
I don't know of any specific foods in research. That's not like something that I have looked up recently, but I do know that in terms of like hormone health, that just adequate nutrition in general, of like eating enough, getting a good variety of nutrition, getting plenty of protein, good micronutrients, all of that can play a very key role, I think, both for female and male hormone health, like, for sure. Like, just instead of honing in on like what foods, like specific foods I think people should be eating, I overall look at like, hey, let's just make sure you're getting enough and a great variety, because that is going to offer you a much more benefit to do that consistently over time than it is seeking out any like specific unique, like, crazy food that might be out there in the world.
Yeah, I'd seen that there being like a positive energy balance as one of the main things for hormonal health. It yeah. And as soon as we start to see people in a really big calorie deficit, we see that those hormones deregulate. It impacts sleep. It impacts, I mean, there's a lot of release of like those stress hormones. I mean, it's not a healthy thing to be constantly in that dieting, especially when you're already putting all this stress on your body when you're training as much as cyclists do. So how do we balance that known information that we've just stated with the need for calorie restriction when getting lean?
Yeah. Well, one area that we look at with our athletes is we will make sure that they're not dieting on the bike. They're not dieting in their workouts, where they will think like, oh,
Intro workout we're talking about.
yeah, like, or even like before a workout, like, oh, I'm going to do this fasted and see if I can like burn
Okay.
more body fat, or I'm going to skip this gel because I'm going to save those calories because I'm trying to like drop some pounds.
Yeah.
I find that that often really backfires significantly for athletes because when your performance and your workouts suffer, they feel like crap. You finish the workout feeling absolutely exhausted and like garbage.
But
And
also
then you end up,
intuitively as well. Like, you know, how many athletes you ever trained with that you're like, they're way overweight because they eat too much on the bike? Like, I've just
yeah.
never come across that. It's like, yeah, maybe pass on like the fourth helping of dessert. Like, that could be your problem, not the extra handful of
Yeah,
Haribo mid-session.
I feel like it's the day-to-day nutrition where we can make the biggest improvements, and then fueling the workouts really well is where we tend to see people still perform well while seeing that body composition get leaner over time. So we have to be in this mindset of like, no, this energy that I'm taking in is going straight to my muscle. It's getting used as energy. I'm going to feel great in this workout. And then you're not going into the rest of the day in this massive deficit and then kind of fighting with your body of like, well, I'm hungry because I'm like way behind on nutrition because I biked for, 2 hours today, but I didn't get enough during that bike. And so that way the rest of the day you actually feel decent and you're able to still make decent food choices instead of having this like battle with your willpower.
Yeah, I cycled in an era where sports nutrition was totally different, where you would literally fall in the door after 6 hours. I rode for a French team, and a lot of the theory was around fasted rides, and they went up 4 or 5 hour depletion rides, we'll call them, where you'd have no carbohydrates the night before, no carbohydrates in the morning, and then do the session on just water or water and salt tablets. And you would fall in the door. And I continued that when I stopped racing full time into kind of my amateur period. And what I found was, and anecdotally, when I observed friends that exhibited the same behavior, we massively underfueled during the session and then massively overfueled after the session. I wonder, is there data to show the quality of your decision making post ride when you fuel adequately versus don't fuel adequately in session?
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen any research, but I would say anecdotally in my experience as an athlete and working with athletes, it's like cognitively when you are like ravenously hungry, like there's like you're never making any good decisions with food.
Yeah, it's
like
willpower.
you're
It's
just
a shot.
yeah, it's your body's just like I need the fastest, quickest, easiest, most high calorie energy possible right now because I am needing to like it's in this survival mode. Our bodies are very keen on living, and so it's going to say like look for the sweets, the candies, the high fat foods, like the peanut butter jar with this, and grab a spoon and be eating, peanut butter from the spoonful. I mean, that's where people
Speculoos.
are.
Have you tasted that?
Speculoos? What is that?
You know what this is? Oh my god, it's going to change your life. You're gonna abandon your career in sports nutrition and just go full time eating speculoos.
Speculoos?
So I found it in Belgium when I was racing there first. So it's the little tea biscuits you get on the side of a coffee in Europe. You know, the little brown tea biscuits you get. It's all of those mashed up in a blender and mixed together. So it's a paste like Nutella that's like served at breakfast time in Belgium and France. And I used to literally bring home tubs and sell it to friends when I was racing out there. Like it will ruin your life.
Well, for a long time I had never had Nutella, and then I recently introduced it to my life a few years ago, and I'm like, oh my god, this is the best.
It's so good. But it is crazy how fast you can take in a large amount of calories with not just those pastes and spreads, but like an ice cream. If you sit down and eat like half a tub of Ben and Jerry's, it's crazy how many calories that is. Whereas like you could easily get through 500 calories, but to get through 500 calories of, I don't know, potatoes or pasta, like that's a lot of eating. Should I get through 500 calories of apples? And like your jaw's kind of give up first.
Yeah, that's a lot of fiber. You can be very full. So I think like if we can fuel on the bike really well and then make great choices the rest of the day, that is really going to set people up for success in seeing that body composition improve while also feeling really great in their performances. Because like I said, that's where most people, they start dieting and then they like can't finish their workouts. They're failing their workouts. They're having to cut them short. They don't want to work out anymore there because they don't have the energy for it. And it's like, that's not what we want. We want to have the best of both worlds. So we have to balance that.
But would it be fair to say we need to make a restriction somewhere? Like if we're fueling well on the bike, we need to have some sort, especially for, I don't want to pigeonhole everyone listening to the podcast. I'm sure there's some guys who are working in construction and super active during the day, but a lot of us now, our lifestyle is migrated to quite sedentary, Zoom calls, long periods in office and cars, commuting. Like, what's our caloric need for the rest of the day's activity? How do we go about estimating that? And then by virtue of that, start to understand how much of a deficit we can make and on what days.
Yeah. Well, I think it gets a little tricky when people start asking me like, oh, how many calories should I be eating? Because I'm like, well, how many are you eating right now? Because if you don't understand like how much you're taking in, like what's the point in even calculating how much you need, right? So I think there has to be some sort of understanding of like, okay, where are there gaps in your nutrition? Are you under fueling right now, or are you in a calorie surplus? Like, where are you at before we even calculate someone's needs?
So would you sorry to cut across, would you baseline that with a 7-day like MyFitnessPal input?
Yeah, like a week-long diary, as long as it's pretty standard to what you typically eat, you can kind of get an average of how much you're taking in. Or sometimes I see athletes that are just wildly inconsistent, where some days they're in a really big caloric surplus and some days they're like taking in maybe 1,000 calories a day. And so it's like, that is a big problem too, where you're having no consistency with things. And so we work on just building a nice foundation where you're eating a consistent amount of nutrition day in and day out. And that kind of puts our body in a nice happy spot too, to get ready to lose some weight.
Okay, interesting. So we have our baseline after 7 days. We're starting to see, okay, I understand why I'm 10 kilograms overweight, because I'm eating a baseline of 3,500 calories off a modest amount of activity. Where do I start to think about making cuts?
Yeah, I would first make sure, are you getting enough protein? Like I said, that was like number one. And then looking at, okay, like where are we getting too much calories? Is it like, are we just going way overboard in carbs? Or is it you just have like a really high fat intake? And so that might be an area where we could just choose some leaner options, trim those calories down, but still make sure that we're getting enough carbs to support performance and energy, and protein to support that muscle. So looking at where we can make some improvements there. Also looking at discretionary calories too. So discretionary calories would be like the calories that you're like desserts, alcohol. It's not that you can't have them. I think I need to stress that. Like, it's not that those things are off limits. I think it's just like volume and frequency of like how many like bites and nibbles of things throughout the day that are accumulating and adding up and just kind of putting you over in calories. Whereas like we could optimize protein and timing of nutrition throughout the day and making sure you're getting enough during the day that you're not even tempted to have like those types of things. And alcohol seems to be one I've been having a lot of conversations with athletes lately.
How bad is alcohol?
It's not going to offer you any benefits, and it does have quite a few calories in there. So if people's desire is to get leaner and it's a pretty high priority of them, I'm like, okay, then let's talk about how much you're drinking and how often, and can we reduce that just to kind of save some calories that way? Because in order to like get you at a calorie deficit, we'd have to cut out food, and then that's not going to really help you improve that body comp if you're drinking 200, 300 calories a day.
I noticed I wouldn't be a huge drinker, but like, especially when I'm abroad and you're in the sun, you kind of go after dinner. It adds up when you look at it at the end of the week and you're like, oh, I had one beer after dinner there. I had one beer, and I wore my Whoop for all of October a couple of months back for Sober October. And I looked at the data from September versus October versus November. And I noticed about a 5% difference on average in my heart rate variability with zero alcohol for October. And also about a 7% difference in my sleep quality over the month. And the only noticeable change was the alcohol. So it definitely got me wondering and wanting to explore more. Like, how bad is alcohol? Obviously, nutritional is one lens we can look at it. True. But I also wonder, does it leave you more vulnerable to making bad choices the following day?
Yeah.
Like if you've had 5 beers at night, who has a healthy breakfast the next day?
Yeah, not very many people, because you just feel terrible. Well, and alcohol also impacts sleep. So not only did you drink that amount that night before, but you probably slept really poorly. So you're waking up feeling very groggy, probably not real great. And so you're not going to want to like make yourself a really nice breakfast to start off the day. So yeah, and like recovery too, if you're, I mean, I'm okay with having like a celebratory beer after a race, but if you're, hitting the bar afterwards and like drinking, I'd say, 2+, 3+ drinks, that's really going to impede your recovery. It's going to dehydrate you. It's going to make you bouncing back from that race or even that hard workout a lot more difficult. Like you're going to feel crappy for days. Versus if you really prioritize that recovery, you're going to bounce back quickly and ready to go and train the next day or, that later on that week.
And I see a lot of people who are trying to lose weight and they're super good for 6 days a week where they're running a slight deficit of like 100 calories, 200 calories, like a very sustainable deficit 6 days a week. But then on the 7th day of the week, it could have been the Saturday night, they'll go out with friends, they'll have 10 beers and a kebab on the way home, but they'll run more of a surplus on the one day than they did deficit for the 6 days. So they're in a weekly caloric surplus, not deficit. And then they're wondering, I've been so good at my diet.
I wouldn't say, I've seen that where athletes are like, I had a terrible day and it ruined everything. And I'm like, well, I don't think it necessarily ruined the entire week's, like, of good eating that you did. But yeah, when you're going out on a bender like that, like it's going to take you days to recover from that. And that's where it's really going to impact you more than, it's not going to erase all of the work that you did the week prior, if that makes sense.
Even if you take 0 alcohol beers, what's the impact of having that elevated blood sugar going to bed?
I think what's interesting is that people really get like bent out of shape about like blood sugars and an insulin response. And I mean, it's the dose is the poison, right? So it's like, it depends on how much you're eating before you go to bed and what you're having with it. If you're having some carbs and a bedtime snack and you're having some protein with it, that blood sugar rise and fall is going to be pretty gradual. And it can really help with like recovery overnight when you're resting. I like to see in terms of carbs, if we can get more carbs earlier on in the day, I think that's better. But if you're still coming up like short on carbs at the end of the day, I'm not against people having a bedtime snack with some carbs, just maybe pair it with some protein to help with that blood sugar.
Today's show sponsor is LMNT. I've spoken with most of the world's top coaches and nutritionists on the podcast, and they all agree that getting the right balance of electrolytes is key to performance. Hydration, it's not just about drinking water, it's about maintaining the right balance of electrolytes, and that's where LMNT comes in, because it's packed with essential electrolytes like sodium, magnesium and potassium. LMNT, it helps sustain steady energy levels throughout the day, it sharpens your cognitive function, and it keeps your muscles cramp-free during tough workouts. So whether you're planning a super intense indoor training session or you're hydrating for a long endurance ride, LMNT's precise formula ensures your body performs at its absolute peak. Now here's an amazing special offer for you guys. This is just for our listeners. You're going to get this free sample pack that I have right here with any purchase by visiting drinklmnt.com/roadman cycling. This sample pack has 8 amazing flavors in it. It's perfect for finding which your favorite flavor is. I'm addicted to the watermelon flavor. You can also share this with a friend if you don't like some of the flavors. This offer is exclusively available through our link, and it's available for both new and returning customers. So head on over to drinklmnt.com/roadman cycling to claim your free sample pack today. I'm going to put that link in the description down below.
So is there foods you can, so you're talking about like lowering the actual glycemic load of the food. Is there foods that if we were just hungry at bed, we'd already hit our allocated carbs for the day? It's like a list of foods people could munch on that don't raise your blood sugar?
I mean, if it's got carbs in it, you're going to see some blood sugar rise. But I think when you're pairing it with protein, you're going to see a much slower rise and fall of that blood sugar. So like cereal and milk is one that like a lot of people like to do. I mean, there's going to be some protein in that milk as long as you're doing like a regular milk or a Fairlife milk or like a soy milk or pea protein milk. If you do almond milk, it's only got like 1 gram of protein in there, so you'd want to pair something else with that. Sometimes I like to do like cottage cheese and some fruit, or like a Greek yogurt, or trying to think of what else you could do. Like some oatmeal would be great too. Something that's just gonna give you a little bit more sticking power versus like that. If you can certainly do ice cream, but sometimes I've got one athlete I can think of that she loves ice cream. She has ice cream every single night. And she hasn't taken me up on this, but I keep offering. I'm like, can you just blend that ice cream with maybe a little bit of protein powder, make yourself a little milkshake, just to help boost that protein in the evening, because we're really working on her protein intake. And that way she's still getting like that ice cream sweetness and flavor, but she's getting that added protein in there as well.
Is there an argument for just going 100% protein, going to bed, like, these protein nooses and stuff?
You can do that. I would just, sometimes it's nice to have just a little bit of carbs in there. Because I find with a snack, if you just have protein, it's just not quite satisfying enough. Like, people are just like, I still feel a little hungry. I'm like, yeah, we could just add a little carbs in there, and it kind of helps kind of satisfy people's appetite a little bit more.
So we had just circling back to try and give sort of a complete dietary picture for people. We had the recommendation for protein for the day. Mm-hmm. How do we gauge our recommendation for carbohydrates based on activity? If I have a 2-hour session, we'll take a hypothetical person that has a metabolic rate of 2,500 calories. Now I have a 2-hour zone 2 session that evening. How should I adapt my carbohydrate intake for the demands of that session?
Yeah, this is kind of where we're a little unorthodox with how we work this with our athletes, and this is just like over time we've found that this is the easiest way to do it. Is so we will have kind of a carbohydrate target for the day, but in terms of like fueling before and during workouts, we don't count those carbs towards their like carb target for the day, if that makes sense. So if they need carbs for that workout, take that, but we're not going to count that towards, like if they're maybe, let's say like macronutrient wise, like 50% carbohydrates for their calories of the day, we won't count the carbs that they're taking in on the bike towards that. That way they're still fueling their workouts well, and then we're still keeping those carbohydrates in check the rest of the day.
And how far do you extend this discount? Do you extend that discount to the meal just before their ride?
If they're having like a snack right beforehand, I'll say, yeah, we don't need to count that. But if they're having like a meal like an hour or 2 hours beforehand, I'm like, well, that's like your breakfast or your lunch, we're going to count that meal. But if you're like 15 minutes out and you're taking, some energy chews or some crackers or some sort of carbs to fuel that workout, then I'm like, yeah, we don't need to count that. But so I try not to get too like heavily detailed, if that makes sense, because I want nutrition to also feel not like very strict. I want it to feel like free and flexible and not like this regimented diet for people.
I guess there must be a tipping point though. Like if I'm, say, a Saturday morning ride and now I'm going out for a 5-hour Saturday ride, that's got to impact the breakfast I'm having pre-ride.
Yeah, that's sometimes the problem with those long rides. And I just had this conversation with an athlete yesterday who rode over his lunch hour. And so it's like, okay, we got to have to make up that nutrition that you didn't get from lunch elsewhere in the day. So we were doing it through breakfast, some snacks, and dinner. But then we still had him fuel that ride really well. We didn't count that nutrition towards his targets, but we just made sure that elsewhere in the day we were being strategic. And if you're going for a 5-hour ride, I would make sure that we're trying to get in a really decent breakfast beforehand, and then trying to optimize recovery nutrition the rest of the day. But you still might come up short, and that's why the rest of those days afterwards are so important for making sure you're nailing that nutrition so you can help yourself recover really well.
Is your terminology around breakfast deliberately vague to keep it simple? Like I think you said a decent breakfast. Is that like what's decent to me might be different to what's decent to you and decent to Joe?
Yeah. So a decent breakfast would be like 30 grams of protein, good amount of carbs, If you can get some micronutrients, so like some fruit and or vegetable, that
What's
would
a
like for
what's
a,
a, sorry
for
to
a
push on this
meal.
now, but what's a good amount? Are we 40 grams, 120 grams for carbohydrates,
Oh, let's see. If you, oh gosh, it would
or is
depend
it
on the
body
athlete,
weight
but
dependent?
like if you were,
I guess
let's
my
see
confusion
here.
on this is I've seen a recent vlog, which a lot of people are seeing, because I got, I think, 300, 400,000 views with Remco getting ready for a 5-hour training ride. And the volume of food, Remco's a 66 kilogram rider. The volume of food that he ate for breakfast, it's like something from a competitive eating contest. It's
Yeah.
more food than I'd eaten an entire day. And he had for breakfast, and he's literally forcing it down himself. Glass after glass of orange juice, oatmeal, cereal, bagels, scrambled egg. And then he's into sports specific stuff like bars and stuff. And he hasn't even got on the bike at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, I've done before a race, I had a trail run end of September. And from the time I woke up at 5 a.m. to the time I started the race at 9:30, I probably had 160, 170 grams of carb that morning. And I felt great during the race.
So
I
what
didn't really plan on taking that. I didn't really realize I was taking that much until afterwards when I added it up and I was like, oh, I actually took in a really decent amount of carbs. So if you're going out for a 5-hour ride, I would say at least 100 grams of carb. But if you're going out for an hour ride, then you could do something like 60. Yeah,
Okay.
it's going to vary depending on the glycogen demand that you're looking at needing in that ride.
So what was your decision making framework for that ultra
For
and
that trail run?
yeah, for the thought of taking in 170 grams of carbs?
Yeah, I didn't really like pick a number. I was just thinking like, okay, I'm getting up at 5 a.m. I've got a 2-hour drive. I'm going to have a little breakfast beforehand. I love pancakes and syrup is always like a pre-race routine for me. So before I left, I had some pancakes and syrup. And then on the drive there, because it was going to be a really hot race for fall here in Minnesota, and I'm a very salty sweater, I put some couple scoops of Scratch and I think a packet of liquid IV or something. Or no, I think a like precision hydration tab in there, like the 1500 tabs. And then drank that on the drive, plus a Morton bar. And then I had some like energy chews like 15 minutes before I started. So yeah, it ended up like adding up throughout the morning. But you know, when you're getting up at 5 a.m. and your race isn't until 9:30, I was like, I'm just going to take in the carbs gradually throughout the morning. And it set myself up nicely for the run because I had just started training for like 6-8 weeks, so I wasn't really great about my intra running nutrition, so I didn't take as many gels as I probably should have during the race, and so that pre-race carbs really saved my butt.
And how do you handle post-race nutrition in a way that supports kind of our overarching goal for the podcast of supporting fat loss while maintaining recovery?
Yeah, I think it's good to go in with a mindset of like, okay, I got done with this work or got done with this race, and I need to make sure that I really help my body bounce back from this. So your muscles are tired. They need to get fed. They prefer carbohydrates. Want to reload those glycogen stores. So making sure you're getting a good dose of carbs. I would say within like 30, 45 minutes, if you can get some sort of carb-rich snack with some protein, that'd be great. But if you're already due to have a meal, trying to get a meal in within 1 to 2 hours afterwards would also be excellent.
How much carbs and protein do we need to get in that recovery period?
If you can get in like 20 grams of protein and 60 to 80 grams of carb would be great.
3 to 4 to 1 ratio?
Yeah. 3 to 1 or 4 to 1, somewhere in there. And it's going to depend on the race. Like if it was a short race, you can do 20 grams of protein, 60 grams of carb. If it was 5-6 hour long race, then you'd want to do more carbs because your glycogen stores are going to be really depleted after those longer endurance rides.
I've seen some pro athletes playing around with caffeine post-ride as well to help increase absorption of carbohydrates. Is there any merit in that?
Oh, I don't know if I've heard that one. I'd have to look. I mean, we take a lot of caffeine like before and during. I think there's definitely lots of research in the benefit of that. I don't know if afterwards necessarily. Maybe. I'd have to look.
We are so excited to announce that we are partnering with Whoop. Whoop are changing the game when it comes to wearable technology and health monitoring. Whoop is a wearable health and fitness coach that provides you with feedback and actionable insights into your sleep, your recovery, your training, your stress, and your overall health. Sarah and I have been using Whoop for years, and we love the insights it provides into our body's inner workings. It really gives us a look under the hood. And you're going to see Mathieu van der Poel, Richard Carapaz, and other elite level cyclists wearing Whoop, but it isn't just for those superstars. All the data is personalized to your unique physiology and fitness levels. If you're interested in taking control of your health and your fitness so that you can excel in all aspects of your life, you have to go and check out Whoop. Go to the URL now, which is join.whoop.com/roadman. I'm going to pop that in the description below, and you're going to get a free month's access to Whoop membership on me. I promise you won't regret it.
Supplement area is interesting because it's constantly changing. It's so marketing driven as well. Like we're seeing ketones like have a big marketing push in the last 24 months. And is that an area you've looked into?
The research is really mixed. Like some show that there's benefits to ketones and some show that it's actually hindering performance. So for me, I'm not on board with that. I'm going with the carbs because we have years and decades of
especially how
research behind
expensive the ketones are.
And like they taste terrible.
Shocking. Shocking.
I mean, I've never tried them, but I've heard they taste absolutely horrendous. I'm like, why would you do that? Like when carbs are delicious.
And any other supplements you're recommending as a staple for athletes? Creatine?
I've kind of gotten on board with creatine this year. I started taking it myself. There's this little bit of fear of the water retention. People saying like their weight go up a little bit. But I find that, performance-wise, you have strength benefits to taking creatine. If you get into your, main season and you want to go off it for a little while, just if you're worried about that water retention, I think that's
how
fine.
bad is the water retention?
It's like
especially
maybe,
if you're microdosing. I have friends who are bodybuilders and they macrodose it, and I've seen water retention there, but with
if you're taking the recommended dose of like 3 to 5 grams a day, you might see like a kilo of water retention, if that. I think what the research has shown is like 0.8 kilos.
Okay. Well, it's
in
not,
water retention.
It's definitely not zero. And I definitely have seen good data as well on even cognition benefits of taking creatine, which is interesting in a world where, 1 in 3 of us is now going to have dementia or Alzheimer's when we're over,
they're actually going to start doing more research for creatine for Alzheimer's as well, which is really cool.
Is there something linked with caffeine and Alzheimer's as well? I've seen something popping up.
No.
I'm a bit of a headline reader, so I'll need to dig into that.
Possibly. I don't know if I've seen that one.
So I think I've got a good picture of what I need to be doing and what I don't need to be doing heading into the next 6 to 12 months with my training. So I'm sure I'll think of many more questions and we'll get you back on for round 2. But I think for now I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for your time.
Start with this advice and then I'll come back in a few months and see how you're doing, and then we'll go to the next level discussion. But honestly, if you're struggling with it, it might be just the best route to work one-on-one with a dietitian, because then we can really hone in and optimize that body comp nutrition while you're still performing well. That's where I think sometimes if you're just struggling to do it on your own, because I'm even in my own little body comp journey now that I'm back to training again, and I'm done having kids. I'm like, all right, I want to get back down to a race physique. And so sometimes when I'm with my own nutrition, I'm asking my team member Mary, who's a dietitian. I have to get 2 dietitians on my team. I'm like, hey, here's my numbers. Can you just help me with this? And she's like, well, if you were my client, this is what I tell them. I'm like, perfect. Okay. I just needed someone to tell me that even though I work with athletes on a daily basis on this, when it's your own nutrition, sometimes it's just hard. There's this mental block, and it's nice to have someone else kind of come in and be that guiding voice for you.
100%, and I'll drop your contact details in the description below, so if anyone wants to get in touch with you, they can.
Awesome.
Alex, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. And click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.